All right, I am really excited to talk about these topics because we're going from like Chuck Schumer to sperm to women using cannabis. So
All of those things are fairly related.
I
So
guess, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, definitely, definitely. I'd be glad to hear about your personal experience. Um,
surely.
let's start with like the big news of the week, which is Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, basically putting in a draft bill to
Mhm.
and circulating it, probably leaking it because it kind of came out in a bunch of different places. And I think the biggest thing that came out of it in my mind is that he said that cannabis legalization is a priority for the Senate. So
Huge.
that's a really big deal. And I think like when you zoom out and you think about this industry and then you're like, the Senate Majority Leader is basically saying this should happen. So from a big perspective, it's a really big deal. From the micro perspective, it's not, because we know that all of this is inevitable and this is likely just
Hmm.
one little step along the way, like, do a bill, circulate it, get people, so the fact that he released a bill and it's not being passed tomorrow is not a big deal. But the fact that this is actually happening, we all know it's happening, but it's cool to see it in progress.
Totally. It's a really strong conversation right now. It's called the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act.
Okay.
Never is a bill going to roll off the tongue, but feels like the most meaty and legitimized cannabis legalization bill that's been proposed. And I know that Schumer and Booker and Wyden have
Mm.
all these senators have loosely been working on this on legalization for some time now, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a political move for Schumer himself, but I thought it was really interesting how open he was with his other Democratic senators saying, hey, if we can do this, this is a big deal for our party. This is how we're
Mm.
going to get young voters in. You want
Right.
people to be Democrats? Legalize weed. This should be an easy platform for us
Yeah.
to stand for. So
Yeah.
I really like that he was super candid about it and was
Yeah.
like just such a politician
Yeah.
about this game piece that he's moving around. But
Right.
very exciting stuff in the bill
It is.
too,
Like
not
what?
just descheduling cannabis, but expunging prior convictions.
Mm-hmm.
And I also there was one thing I actually took this from a New York Times article
Yeah.
that there's a provision that would
Okay.
establish a cannabis justice office at the Justice Department to help fund job training, legal aid, and help with reentry after incarceration. And
That's
I really
awesome.
appreciated that. Yeah, they like really vocalized the importance of these things in this bill. They weren't just, loosely mentioning, and we'll get around to it.
Yeah.
There were actual bullet points of like, here's how we will meet these objectives. And that's
Yeah.
huge.
Well, Schumer's from New York, and New York lost its first bid to legalize a couple of years ago because they didn't have those components. And so
Hmm.
you've got to bring in kind of the middle conservative people, but you also have to build in people that are like, this is our chance for you guys to basically say, I'm sorry, and this is how we're going to make it up. Because you guys are not going to make millions of dollars on this thing while you just sent generations of Black and brown people primarily to jail for it. So he should know from that experience, and it's righteous and it's important, and really that is the most important thing. Obviously, like, a lot of us either make money or try to make money in cannabis, but that's just a footnote to the real deal, which is get people out of prison and make it right.
Absolutely. And it's pretty wild to have current representatives also talking openly about the fact that, like, oh, yeah, sorry about the war on drugs. We were targeting minorities. To
Yeah.
really blatantly mention that across the board is
Yeah.
it's not shocking because we obviously know that that really is the
Yeah.
reality of the war on drugs, but it's still pretty interesting to be in 2021 like, oh, okay, these
Yeah.
people that are elected officials are saying the conspiracy theories were true.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're acknowledging at least part of it, and sort of it's one version of the reparations
Mm,
movement that has some viability. And it they don't use that word, but that's basically what people are talking about.
right.
Speaking of the weird place we are in 2021, the FBI is loosening its policy on hiring people with previous cannabis consumption. I guess you can smoke, if you smoked weed 366 days ago, you can still be an FBI agent,
That's
but
right.
not if it was 364 days ago. Um, what's your take on the FBI and their cannabis rules?
I love to see shifts in all different directions. I think it's a really fascinating time, both because of COVID, people now working from home, having different standards for which they will return to a workplace, and also just the fact that so many people smoke cannabis. A lot of different corporations. We talked about the GM, the General
Yeah,
Motors
right.
employment issue, and Amazon, I know, has also had issues finding enough people to work for them that
Yeah.
don't have a history of cannabis use. So I think this is both comical and also
Mm,
timely. My favorite part about this is that they announced this on Twitter. The
okay.
FBI is like really trying to reach stoners, if you ask
Yeah,
me.
right. And got their only stoner in the organization who runs their social media account to do it.
To post about it,
Yeah,
surely, yeah.
yeah.
Um, there was also, I went back in time a little bit. There was a story from a few years ago that the FBI was having a difficult time hiring hackers specifically who
Uh-huh.
did not have a history of cannabis use. So,
Yeah.
I I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, I work in weed. It doesn't matter to me if my federal agent has used cannabis as long as they're not prosecuting people who use cannabis.
well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, it's
Right.
definitely like all these big organizations realize that it's really hard to hire people if you don't accept people that smoke weed, because so many people use cannabis for so many different reasons. It again, I know you know this, but like there are people that use it to fall asleep, or because they have pain, or because they have glaucoma, or because it helps them with their MS or whatever. So like it's not just the stoner hacker people that it's like across all of society. It's like this kind of almost like this discrimination issue. So
Hmm.
they obviously need to attract more people. I'm sure joining the FBI is not as sexy as it once was. Um, but
But the movies make it look so cool.
yeah, right, right. If you're into like, yeah, whatever. But it kind of when I read this, it kind of pissed me off though, to tell you
Why?
the truth, because it's hypocrisy.
Hmm.
I was like, these are a bunch of fucking hypocrites. The entire federal government, you know, maybe even we'll throw Schumer in there. Like you've got this giant organization of the federal government that continues to fuck with people, throw people in jail, prosecute people. And then at the same time, they want to loosen their hiring standards so that they can like get the type of people they need in their organization so
Hmm.
that they can do more of the same. So it's like I just don't want, we talked a little bit about this the last episode with Clarence Thomas, and just kind of, I just don't want people to be able to virtue signal or to be able to um, achieve their own narrow interests around cannabis and still to be part of the problem at the same
Hmm.
time. And I think we're going to see this over the next X amount of years, that you're going to be people that are just like, the people that are the problem are going to all of a sudden switch sides, and A, try to make money, and B, try to be like, on the other side of things. And we just can't let people off the hook. Um,
Totally.
and the FBI is an organization with a lot of skeletons in its closet. And so I don't want to give them any credit. I think it's interesting,
Hell
but
yeah.
fuck them.
Wow. I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. I think that's important to hold accountability as people who currently exist in the cannabis space to not to bar anyone from entry, but absolutely to
Hmm.
just let people know like no false promises. You either
Yeah.
mean it or you saying it is one thing, but are
Yeah,
you going to
you can have
actually
it both
put
ways.
forth?
You cannot have it
Totally.
both ways. You can have it both
Oof.
ways.
Ooh, got me fired up, Jeffrey.
Okay. Well, speaking of having it both ways, what the
Oh
next
gosh.
study?
Where are we going to go with this one? Oh, you want
Oh,
me to talk about sperm?
yeah, that was unfair. Tell us about the sperms study, Brooke.
I've actually had a lot of people ask me about this. Like somehow I know
Okay.
all there is to know about cannabis and sperm.
Uh-huh.
Um, but it's an interesting topic,
Okay.
cannabis and sex. A lot of people use cannabis in the bedroom. They say that it helps with pain or sensitivity or enhances
Hmm.
pleasure. But there's another interesting aspect of cannabis and sex, and that has to do with fertility.
Okay.
And so there's not been a lot of recent studies. I think the most recent study was in 2019 on how weed affects sperm motility and sperm count. And there's some conflicting research as well. But the general consensus by many doctors is
Hmm.
if you're trying to have babies, don't smoke weed.
Really?
Cannabinoids, yeah,
Like
cannabinoids can
that
have a
directly?
tendency.
If you're trying to have babies don't smoke weed, that's like what most doctors say.
It can't, okay, I'm not going to say all doctors or most doctors, but many doctors, because there is
Hmm.
no conclusive, pretty much like everything with cannabis, right? Like, well,
Hmm.
we've done the research, but we can't say for sure.
Right, right, right.
So,
Because we weren't allowed to do any research, but yeah,
precisely.
yeah.
But I really do think this is a very interesting subject, and I think that it would affect a lot of men's consumption if we did find out for certain
Hmm.
that using cannabis can decrease your sperm count and
Hmm.
its effectiveness to reach an egg. On
Hmm.
the flip side, could be a really, really curious point of entry as like a birth control for men.
Point of entry. Yeah.
uh, like, okay, cool. I don't want to have babies, so I'm going to smoke a lot of weed. Um, and
Yeah.
there's talk that like if you have cannabinoid receptors in your reproductive parts, both men
Okay.
and women do. And so, cannabinoids, if you overconsume and your body is not processing your cannabinoids properly, not detoxifying
Yeah.
properly, you can have a buildup of cannabinoids in your testes,
Yeah.
and that can be what affects the sperm's
Hmm.
health. Um, Now, again, this is truly inconclusive, but it is a very interesting conversation. And I would love if anyone's listening and has had an experience with cannabis affecting their sperm count,
Or
keep it to
their
yourselves.
doctors,
Please
or
don't let it.
yeah, or their doctors telling them, yeah, you probably should, whatever. Yeah.
Would love to
That's
hear about it.
interesting. That's super interesting. God knows we need a lot more research. It doesn't sound crazy that consuming a lot of cannabis could affect your body in a lot of different ways.
Right,
I
of
I,
course.
I did, and I don't, neither one of us are doctors. Obviously, if you're trying to get pregnant, there's probably a lot of things you want to pay attention to, like nutrition and sleep and alcohol and all
Yeah.
that type of stuff. I just liked that cannabis may affect sperm count, sperm motility, because it actually slows them down because they
Isn't that kind of
and
cute?
sperm shape. I just thought that was really nice to think about. They're
They just
slower
look
and
like
they're
weed leaves, actually.
yeah,
They
yeah. They
just.
just kind of they yeah. Um,
Oh,
yeah, we'll see. We'll see what once we can actually scientists are allowed to actually study cannabis. We'll see all the upsides, all the downsides,
totally.
and there's certainly going to be a lot of upsides and a lot of downsides proven, and people are going
It'll
to
be an
then be able
exciting
to make
time.
good decisions. Yeah.
This is probably why Schumer wants to legalize weed. He's like, I got a hunch. My swimmers aren't working as well as they
Yeah,
used to.
I don't
It's
know. Have
like,
you
Chuck,
seen
because you're
Chuck
old.
Schumer lately? I don't think it's the weed that's affecting his sperm count. Um, Speaking of sperm count,
Count. Like liquid.
speaking of
There you
liquid,
go. Yeah,
um,
fluids. There
so
we go.
there was an interesting article that you shared about cannabis farms not using as much water as previously thought. And I thought that was an interesting article for you to
Yeah.
pick for our discussion. And I'd love to hear what your perspective is
For
on it.
sure. Yeah. Well, there was a recent study by the Times Standard, and
Mm,
basically they were able to conclude that legal licensed outdoor cannabis grows do
Mm.
not use as much water as previously suspected. So
Okay.
it was believed that cannabis grows used like the most water out of
Right.
any agricultural crop. And
Wow.
that's very incorrect, which is obviously a big win for weed. Looks
Mm.
very good for us.
Mm.
So cannabis grows use far less water than almonds, which is that's California's top agricultural commodity. Almonds are using all of the water. So that's really where the hatred should be. Stop drinking
Well,
almond milk,
we
drink oat
also
milk.
grow like rice in the Central Valley. Like we have rice field. There's a lot of other, yeah. It's not just, don't hate so much on almonds. Almonds are a
Okay.
little bit over hated on, but yeah, almonds use a lot of water.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right, cool. I'll go easy on almonds, but still drink
Yeah.
oat milk. But in any case, it was also found that illegal cannabis grows are to blame for a huge consumption of water.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of illegal grows, particularly in the Emerald Triangle, that
Yeah.
are using public land.
Yeah.
Big issue. And there's
Mm.
no natural water source or there's no like regulated water source to feed
Mm.
these crops. So water's being shipped in or trucked in or being like siphoned off.
Sure.
And there's a lot of water waste. So like a little bit of legal grows are
Yeah.
in the clear, illegal grows are kind of like giving us a bad rep.
Yeah.
Um, and then another thing that this study showed was that cannabis actually has a really high like value, if you will, per gallon of water.
Yeah.
So in some agricultural terms, this is what they said that tomato crops produce 1/10 to 2 cents of product value per gallon of water
Yeah.
used to grow.
Right.
Not a whole lot. Cannabis produces $7 worth of value per gallon of water. Now that's probably
Wow.
because cannabis is a very expensive product
Yeah. It's like the
in the
top
market.
cash crop basically in the world. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right. But still, hey, I think it's great news. I love when we learn about the environmental impact of
Yeah.
cannabis, whether it be for the better or the worse. It's all really important information to help steer the industry in the right direction and pave the way for, hey, maybe we can help almonds figure out their jam.
Yeah, the last thing you said before the almonds thing is exactly what I was thinking. Obviously, legal versus illegal, that's great, and regulated. That's a win for regulation. But I'm just so glad we're talking about it, because you and I live in California. The state is in this historic drought. The
Mhm.
entire West Coast was on fire last year. We're in a global climate emergency. The whole West is running out of water and the earth is heating up. And so we're part of this industry that has a forward trajectory that is long and wide and high. Like cannabis, I believe, is really going to be transformational for the entire world. If we're going to be riding this giant wave of growth, which I think will do really well for the world, while at the same time living in a world that has these massive environmental challenges, we need to be constantly thinking about and considering and tuning the industry to make sure that we're part of the solution and not part of the problem. So I'm glad that we're talking about it. I love to talk about electricity use and water use and packaging and all of the things, because like we love the industry, we love cannabis, but this is a big industry that's going to have a big impact, and let's keep it at the forefront of the conversation.
Preach. Totally. Yes. Spot on. Save the planet, weed.
And then it will also help us deal with and adapt with all of the tough times that we as a planet are going to inevitably face. Um, Statistics, stat of the week.
Let's
My
talk about the
favorite, my
stat of the week.
favorite part. Stat of the week. Women are the fastest growing gender of people that use cannabis. Tell us why.
Women are among the fastest groups fastest growing groups of new cannabis
Of
users.
new
So
cannabis users. Okay,
starts to
cool.
get the stats starts to get
No,
reduced in
no, no.
significance
That's
a
a
bit.
pretty big thing. That's a pretty
Okay,
big
great.
thing. Yeah,
Okay,
that's super. I mean,
beautiful.
there are a lot of women in the world. That's a pretty
There's plenty of us. We're so sorry about that. We're taking up space. But so ladies make up
a lot of
59%
water. Yeah.
of new users. Yeah, we use a lot of water. Yeah. There we go. We're to blame for the overconsumption. Um, so women make up 59% of new cannabis users, and they also tend to be younger consumers than men
Mm,
and heavier consumers than men, which
mm,
is so I don't not cool, that's not the right word. I mean, that's very interesting. It's not
mm.
what I would have ever thought. Just more proof in the pudding that we falsely stereotype
Yeah.
genders
Yeah.
all the time. And this study went on to mention that in Michigan, 59% of cannabis consumers are women, and women also dominate consumption in Colorado and in Washington state.
They dominate consumption, meaning the new users, or they
No,
actually
just
use more?
overall.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that
That's
a trip?
crazy. Yeah,
Right. And I think it's pretty close here between men and
it
women, but
is.
nevertheless, we've tipped the scales slightly.
Interesting. Yeah. Cause I did a study at my last job of California consumers, and it was equal. It was actually equal in terms of money spent and in terms of the percentage of people of different of women and men that use. But that's also, it's been kind of quasi legal for a long time in California.
Mm.
There's traditionally been more of a male skew among cannabis use. That's usually been ascribed to the fact that it's been illegal and men are more likely to do risky illegal things, frankly. And so when it's illegal, it becomes kind of more of a man thing, slightly more. But when it's more open and it's more accessible, then it tends to even out.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think there's also the fact that perhaps some women have felt uncomfortable to broadcast their consumption or
Mm.
admit to it. So, particularly with these stats, it could be that women have always been consuming, but they're just now
Yeah,
like letting people know
yeah.
or
There's
shopping
probably
openly.
some of that. I think it's also interesting the different uses between men and women. And when I squint my eyes and look at the industry, it's still a very male signaling industry. The
Hmm.
brands, the way that we talk about it. But when you dig into why women are using cannabis compared to men, it tends to be for more health related things. And it's always in the data. I don't have the stats in front of me, but a lot of women use it for menstrual cramps. A lot of women use it for
Yeah.
menopause symptoms. A lot of women use it just for the general achiness of being a person. And you almost never see that as in major use cases for people, because menstruation is comes every 28 days or so.
Yeah.
And but you never see any products, rarely see brands that speak to that. The women brands tend to be very much like some dream of a suburban athleta yoga mom thing, which I know is a thing, but it also it feels very stereotypical. So I think that this hopefully will get a little bit more real authentic attention to the way that women use cannabis and the way it can help them.
I love that. You hear that, brands? May this provide you with the confidence to
Yeah,
advertise to
yeah,
me.
yeah. Maybe like yeah, maybe cannabis will be in like the women's health section of the pharmacy someday.
Curious.
Like the Always brand or the Tampax, right?
Tampax.
I don't know.
Tampax vape
That was
pens.
a bad idea. That's a bad idea. Don't do
I
that. Don't
think
do
I
Tampax.
think it could be a really good idea.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
may be
maybe,
onto something.
maybe.
Oh,
All right. Well, so should we do the controversy of the week? Because this is a women controversy,
totally.
women-oriented controversy. Um, and I was on vacation when this kind of went down.
Okay.
So uh,
I'm
Could you
excited
kind
to
of,
hear your
yeah,
thoughts
get me
about
up
it,
to
but yeah.
speed, get me up to speed on this kind of Olympic controversy.
Right on. Obviously, it's a huge story. Sha'Carri Richardson, she was
Mm,
meant to run for the US team in the Olympics
mm,
and was given a drug test. She
mm.
failed. She failed for THC
Okay.
specifically. She said that the reason she had consumed cannabis was particularly related to the death of her mother. So it was, here we go, a woman using cannabis as another healing tool. This was a tool for her in her grieving process.
Yeah.
And not that the, obviously, the drug policy of the Olympics cares too much about the nuances of someone's consumption, but nevertheless, she can
Mm,
no longer run. And this has become not just a national issue, but a global issue.
mm.
And our very own Joe Biden chimed in on the conversation. And obviously, his stance on cannabis legalization has been a little unclear, a little bit wonky. But
Yeah.
he told reporters in regards to this, to Sha'Carri, he said, the rules are rules and she knew the rules going in, but whether the rules should remain that way is a different issue. A lot of gray area, a lot of interpreting, like, what did Joey really mean
Hmm.
with that? But to me, sounds like he's potentially open to a conversation of like, this this was a heartbreak for many Americans.
Yeah.
Is this policy working for us?
Yeah.
And I actually shared about this story on Instagram, and I had a
Hmm.
few people chime in and tell me when it comes to the Olympics, it's a global, like the global WHO drug policy, whatever, I forget what they are called. Um,
WHO. Yeah.
yeah, their policy on cannabis is it's a no-go for anyone, anywhere. So whatever America's stance on it doesn't really matter.
Oh, right.
Um,
That's true.
but
Right.
whatever the case, it's obviously very disappointing, probably mostly for Sha'Carri.
Yeah.
But she was this darling,
She's an awesome athlete, right? She's
totally
amazing
breaking world
persona.
records,
She's a super cool, dynamic, awesome looking
a
person.
star.
Yeah, a star, exactly. And a star in a way that, would be wonderful to represent the United States of America because, it's not like Dorothy Hamill, or like, do you know who Dorothy Hamill is? Do you remember Dorothy Hamill? You
Yeah.
don't? Okay. All right. It's like a really diverse, strong, it is a shame.
Mm.
um what do you think about it?
I mean, not that my opinion matters too much, but it is certainly interesting knowing that Michael Phelps was pretty much candid about his cannabis consumption all throughout the Olympics. Shaun White, the snowboarder, um, Olympic gold winner
Yeah.
for snowboarding, he posted something online that was like,
Huh.
as he's accepting his gold medal, he was like, I was high. So
Wow.
is this
A double standard.
racial issue? Is there a double standard
Hmm.
here? Why was she being tested at this moment? Why didn't someone, like, did she know? Um,
Yeah.
Not that I think like strings should be pulled on the back end, but also could strings have been pulled on the back end?
Hmm.
Um, I don't really know what road led her here other than she used weed and she failed
Yeah.
a drug test and that's what's happening. She
Yeah.
no longer gets to run. Hopefully she'll get an endorsement from Nike or a million
Yeah.
dollar contract with Adidas. I know cannabis brands are going to be chomping at the
Yeah.
bit to
That's
work with
true.
her. So, maybe everything happens for a reason. She'll still be able to run in an upcoming Olympics
Yeah.
competition. So it's not like the end of the road for
Sure.
her.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was definitely like a very eye-opening news story. I was kind of excited to, not that this happened, but I was excited for so many people to
Yeah.
have to formulate an opinion on
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
I
You're
feel
right.
about drug
It
testing.
opened up a new conversation. um yeah, I feel kind of weird because I sort of agree with Joe Biden, and his position on cannabis is pretty poor, and he's an old white guy, and like, but I totally get what he means. And I don't know, I kind of feel weird about that because to me, I get what he's saying, which is one, maybe that shouldn't be the rule. But if it is the rule, then everybody has to follow it and it needs to be enforced. Now, of course, if there's a double standard or if there's people pulling strings, obviously that's corruption and that shouldn't happen. The other thing that surprised me a little bit, because I was on vacation, but I was on Twitter following this a little bit, is everybody was like, oh, like, as if weed was a performance enhancer. In my experience, it totally is a performance enhancer. And I would not be surprised if the snowboarders and the swimmers and like, I think it's totally can be for people a performance enhancer. So to me, it does go into that category. Now, of course, it's weird because cannabis can be a medicine outside, and we don't have a way of outside the competition. We don't have a way of differentiating that. But right. I didn't think it was quite accurate for people to be like, why would weed ever be banned? It's never helped anybody in athletic competition. That's not true at all. Like, it helps with recovery, but it also can help with flow and energy and focus and all of that. So it's sad. It's sad that it happened. It's too bad. But it's definitely complicated.
Yeah, it's totally complicated. The only thing I'll say is, hey, at least she gets to ride headlines for a little while longer. Yeah. And who knows what's to come out of this experience for her. Perhaps we have a new cannabis advocate on our hands that will really continue to propel the conversation forward. And that's so stellar.
Absolutely.
Couldn't think of a better rep.
Absolutely. Well, great catching up with you, Brooke.
Yeah, great dialing in the weed news with you, Jeffrey. Can't wait to see what happens next week. There's always something.
That's all right. Well, looking forward to the next conversation. See you later.
See you.